They said the chandeliers in Montrose Hall had never dimmed in 50 years, yet that night, I swore I saw them flicker, just once, as if the very light itself hesitated before what was about to unfold. Maybe it was the weight of so many whispered judgments, or perhaps, as I would come to believe, it was the breath of fate pausing between beats. If you've ever felt overlooked, if you believe that even the quietest lives deserve their moment in the light, then like and subscribe, because this is not the story of a debutante's glittering triumph, but of a woman the world forgot, until the shadowed Duke took her hand. I remember the sound first, the waltz drifting like perfume through the ballroom air, sweet, endless, and cruelly familiar. I had stood in that same corner for years, half hidden by marble pillars and polite irrelevance, watching the parade of youth and charm whirl past me like constellations I was forbidden to touch. The laughter, the rustle of silk, the low murmur of admiration, it all seemed to come from another world, one that had long since closed its gilded doors to Lady Eveline Hartmoor. I was not poor, nor plain, nor disgraced, I was simply forgotten. A relic of 20 seasons gone by, one of those unfortunate souls who had outlasted the patience of matchmaking mothers and the interest of hopeful sons. I had become, in the cruel arithmetic of society, invisible. And yet, on that winter night in 1860, something stirred in the stillness that wrapped around me like the folds of my worn sapphire gown. The orchestra paused, just briefly, before resuming in a minor key that made the chandeliers tremble with resonance. I turned, and through the sea of swirling masks and diamonds, I saw him, the figure who would shatter every rule I had quietly obeyed for 2 decades. He stood at the edge of the dance floor, half-shadowed, his black attire absorbing the light rather than reflecting it, a man both part of the crowd and utterly apart from it. The Duke of Ashbourne, they whispered, though no one dared say his name too loudly. Once a darling of the court, now a ghost among the living, a widower who had withdrawn from the world after the mysterious death of his betrothed. Some said he was mad, others that he carried a curse. I had dismissed those tales as the tongue's usual brand of gossip, until his gaze found mine. I cannot describe it as admiration, nor curiosity. It was recognition, as though he'd been waiting for me all along, across the long, lonely years of silence we had both endured. And then, impossibly, he began to move toward me, parting the crowd with a presence so commanding that even the most brazen debutantes shrank aside. I felt my pulse stutter, foolishly aware that the eyes of the entire ballroom were now following his every step, watching, waiting, whispering. When he stopped before me, he did not bow in the polished, performative way of our peers. Instead, he inclined his head just slightly, his gloved hand extending into the space between us, the faintest tremor of command in the gesture. "Lady Eveline," he said, his voice low and calm, like thunder heard from far away, "would you grant me the honor of this dance?" For a moment, I could not breathe. It had been 20 years since anyone had asked. I was 40, perhaps still handsome in a certain light, but the idea of waltzing again before so many sharp-tongued spectators seemed absurd. Yet, there was something in his expression, a grave sincerity, a quiet defiance, that dissolved the hesitation clinging to my ribs. Slowly, I placed my hand in his, and the music swelled as if the orchestra itself had been waiting for this impossible moment. When we stepped onto the dance floor, a hush rippled through the crowd. Even through the layers of silk and glove, I could feel the warmth of his hand, the steadiness of his lead, as though he carried the rhythm not in his steps but in his soul. We moved together, not perfectly, not gracefully at first, but in a kind of unspoken understanding, each turn erasing a year of solitude from my heart. Around us, the whispers grew, fierce and disbelieving, the Duke of Ashbourne, with her. I heard none of it. The world had narrowed to the rise and fall of the music, the glint of candlelight on his mask, the rare and fleeting sensation of being truly seen. For a heartbeat, I wondered if he was real at all, if perhaps I had conjured him out of longing and loneliness. But then he spoke, barely audible above the strings, "You watch the room as though it is a stage upon which you were never allowed to perform." I met his eyes, startled. "And you?" I asked. "Do you not watch from the shadows?" His mouth curved, faintly. Perhaps I'd been waiting for the right partner. As the final notes trembled into silence, he bowed over my hand, not ceremoniously, but with something like reverence, and vanished before the applause began. Only later, when I returned home, Did I notice the faint scent of sandalwood clinging to my gloves, and the smallest folded card tucked into my sleeve? For words, written in a hand of perfect restraint, until our next waltz. When dawn came, it brought no peace, only the restless echo of violins still haunting my thoughts. I awoke with the card still pressed against my palm, as though I had clutched it through the night like a talisman, proof that what had happened in Montrose Hall had not been some fevered dream. Until our next waltz. The words seemed to pulse with their own quiet certainty, both promise and riddle. Yet by afternoon, the city had already devoured the story. Everywhere I turned, whispers bloomed like frost on glass, the wallflower and the ghost dupe, the widow's shadow dancing with the forgotten spinster, a scandal born from pity, or madness, or both. I had endured ridicule before, but this particular kind, cut deeper, not because of cruelty, but because of what it awakened in me, hope. Foolish, fragile hope. The world had not noticed me in 20 years, and now that it did, it was to mock my daring to exist beyond invisibility. I had resigned myself to that fate, until the knock came. The butler's voice trembled slightly as he announced, His Grace, the Duke of Ashbourne. My teacup nearly shattered. I rose too quickly, nearly tangling the hem of my gown as I crossed the drawing room. He entered without fanfare, no entourage, no dramatic flourish. He was dressed in a dark morning coat that seemed to drink the light, and his face, though composed, bore the pallor of a man who lived more in memory than in the present. Your Grace, I began, though my voice faltered. You are most unexpected. Then I have succeeded already, he said simply, his eyes tracing mine not with possession, but curiosity, as though he was studying a rare portrait long kept from the public eye. He gestured toward the empty seat beside the fire. May I? I nodded, my heart hammering like a young girl's. For a long moment, we sat in silence, the fire snapping softly between us, its warmth unable to breach the cold that clung faintly to him. I believe I owe you an explanation, he said at last. Last night was impulsive, perhaps. But I do not regret it. And yet you must see how your actions have complicated things, I replied carefully, unwilling to sound either wounded or flattered. For both of us. Yes, he admitted, his gaze fixed on the flames. Though I have found that complications are often the only proof one is alive. His tone was almost wry, and for a moment I glimpsed the man beneath the myth, the one the tongue had named cursed, cold, unreachable. I had heard the tales, of course. How his fiancée had drowned under mysterious circumstances, how he had vanished from society for years, wandering the continent like a restless soul. How he had returned last season without explanation, and danced with no one. Until me. Why me, Your Grace? I asked, unable to contain the question any longer. There were younger, lovelier partners to choose from. He turned toward me then, and the faintest trace of warmth entered his expression. Because when I looked at you, I saw recognition. Not curiosity, not fear, recognition. As though you, too, had spent years listening to music that was never meant for you. I did not know what to say to that. He rose then, pacing the edge of the hearth, his gloved hands clasped behind his back. You must understand, he said softly, after my fiancée's death, the world ceased to make sense. I kept company with ghosts, both real and imagined. But last night, when I saw you, alone, composed, unbowed, I remembered what it felt like to be among the living. My throat tightened. Your Grace, I whispered, you mistake sympathy for salvation. He looked back at me, the faintest glimmer of a smile ghosting his lips. Perhaps. Or perhaps salvation is found in unexpected hands. Before I could form a reply, he reached into his coat and placed something on the mantelpiece, a single white gardenia, dew still clinging to its petals despite the chill outside. For you, he said. A token of my gratitude, for allowing me to remember. And just as he had done the night before, he bowed not like a duke, but like a man offering penance, and left as silently as he had come. For a long time after, I could do nothing but stare at that flower, its delicate scent filling the room with something that felt dangerously like tenderness. Over the following days, his visits became a pattern. Never announced, never long, but always marked by something, flowers, a book, a conversation that lingered long after his departure. I began to learn the small, human details of him, that he favored black tea over wine, that he still wrote letters to his fiancée's family every year, that he could not bear to hear certain piano pieces because they reminded him of her laughter. Yet within those fragments of grief lived something else, a gentleness, a carefulness of speech, as though he feared breaking the fragile peace between us. The ton's curiosity swelled into outrage. Invitations that had once been dutifully extended to me stopped arriving altogether. My name became shorthand for scandal whispered behind gloved hands. The Duke's folly. The spinster's revenge. But their words could not drown out his voice, steady and sincere. Let them talk. They have made a sport of cruelty for too long. It is time someone waltzed against their rhythm. And so I did, quietly, without fanfare, without apology. For the first time in my life, I no longer watched others dance. I was no longer the shadow in the corner. The shadows, I realized, had a waltz of their own. The night of the ball arrived in a swirl of frosted air and whispered expectation, and I found myself standing by the grand window in the drawing room of Sebastian Vale, Duke of Ashbourne's ancestral estate, the silvery moonlight pooling at my feet like regret I'd shed long ago. When I had accepted his hand months before, after years of watching, waiting, hoping for nothing, I never imagined the world would demand spectacle of us, yet here it was, guests in glittering finery, the murmur of rumor hanging heavy in the chandeliered hall, and me, once the silent observer, now the center of scrutiny. He appeared at my side without announcement, his dark coat brushing the floor, his eyes reflecting the torchlight and something softer, unwavering. Tonight they will see what I have known, he whispered, offering his arm. We entered together, the orchestra's first notes rising like hesitant sighs, and I felt the hush of the crowd fold itself around us. He led me to the floor, and for a moment I sensed all the previous seasons revisit me, the empty invitations, the sideline dances, the lonely foyer where I listened to music from beyond the curtains. But now the music was ours, and his hand at my waist anchored me in reality, no longer the watcher, but the one dancing. As we spun beneath the gazes of society, I felt a shift in the air, the tongue's stares sharpened, the whispers thickened, but the Duke held me steady. They wonder, he said softly during a pause, why I chose you. I smiled then, not in doubt, but in quiet certainty. Perhaps because you saw me. He nodded, his face framed by candlelight. Yes, truly saw you. In that moment the murmurs faded into background noise, the lamplight blurred into haloed glow, and the only rhythm that mattered was ours. The final strains of the waltz faded, and he bowed over my hand, not in performance, but in reverence. A pause rippled through the hall, tentative at first, then wholehearted. He escorted me toward the grand staircase, where the hush turned to awe as we ascended side by side, a pair no longer bound by past whispers. In the weeks that followed, our announced engagement ignited scandal and speculation, some dismissing me as a consolation prize, others marveling at the grace of our union, but I had ceased caring for their judgments. I had danced because I was ready, and loved because I was chosen, not by society's rubric, but by a man who saw the shadow and reached for the light. On our wedding day the skies were grey, heavy with promise, as I walked toward Sebastian beneath the ancient oaks of Ashbourne estate. He waited, calm and solemn, and when I joined him he slipped the simple ring onto my finger and whispered, "At last." At last, I thought, listening to the hush of falling leaves, the rustle of gowns, the delicate hush of new beginnings. I looked around at the faces gathered, the gilded dresses, the polite clinks of champagne glasses, and I realized the world might still expect me to play a part, but this time I was writing the script. My years of watching others waltz had taught me one thing: the dance isn't about being seen, it's about being present. And with his hand in mine, I stepped forward, no longer the wallflower in the corner, but the woman who claimed the floor. Our first dance as husband and wife began beneath the stars, the moon our spotlight, and for the first time I felt free. The whispers would follow, as they always do, but the secret I carried in my heart, the steady beat of his hand against mine, the promise of silent afternoon visits, the soft surrender of grief into love, would remain ours alone. In that silence I found every word unspoken, every story untold, every step danced in truth. And as the music wrapped around us and the night stretched on, I knew that life's greatest waltz was not the one they watched, it was the one we lived.